Good day, everybody. We are very happy to welcome everyone who has already joined our Zoom meeting and who has just started following us on Facebook and on YouTube. Again, we encourage everyone to join Zoom so that we could later on in our Q&A session put screen and have some sort of interactive discussion. But if you're not able, you're still very welcome to leave your questions under our Facebook and YouTube live streams, and we will do our best to include your questions in the Q&A session. Today is the second time we're discussing local elections in Ukraine, and even though they took place on 25th of October, it already seems like ages ago. Yet we still consider it important to discuss the outcomes of the elections and to take stock and to get up and to try to paint a picture of what is awaiting us in the weeks, months, and probably years ahead. So this event is again organized the joint initiative of Promote Ukraine and Vox Ukraine. So to begin with, I would like to very briefly give floor to Pani Yulia Mincheva, who's representing Vox for a few greeting words.
Thank you, Marina. I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you for joining. And it's really the second event, and I encourage you to read the follow-up about previous one on the Vox Ukraine website, because we discussed the legal amendments that were adopted, and now we can actually see what happened and how it's really affect. And also all the three main parties have already proclaimed themselves as winners, but no one actually did. And all regional elites seems to maintain their domination for the next 5 years, and it's very important given into account their decentralization reform and all this progress that we have made for local development for the past 5 years. And actually the main question that we have now, and one of them is a low turnover, and we are facing the second round of election in a few of main cities and some territorial matters. So let's talk. Thank you for gathering such a marvelous panel right now. And I would like to, at this stage, also introduce Marina Yaroshevich, expert from Promote Ukraine. Thanks for our cooperation, and the floor is yours. Please introduce us to our panelists, and let's see what these local elections actually meant for Ukraine right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So again, we're organizing discussion in English. Why? Because our idea is to actually disseminate information and spread knowledge about what is actually happening in Ukraine to our external audiences. And it seems that our efforts bear fruit. Today we are joined by both former and current members of the European Parliament, and Ms. Rebecca Harms, who was a member of the European Parliament from 2004, if I'm not mistaken, to 2019, for 15 years, will be talking to us about pre-election observation on behalf of National Democratic Institute. But also I just would like to acknowledge the presence and express our appreciation to Mr. Kubilius, who is the current who is the current member of the Parliament, and who is chairing the Euronest, which is the Parliamentary Assembly of the Eastern Partnership. And he told me just before that he just joined to listen because he considers the question of local elections in Ukraine very timely and prominent. So again, we're very thankful to you both, and we will begin with Ms. Harms, who will share her experience as election observer.
Thank you, everybody in Brussels and Kyiv and Lviv for the invitation, and it's even nicer to join and to meet now Andrius in this meeting. I have not seen him since long, and so when he decided to take over the chair or co-chair of Euronest Parliamentary Assembly, I was very happy because I knew this position, which I loved a lot, would be in good hands after I left Brussels. And as far as I can follow, Andreas, I use the opportunity to thank you for your huge engagement and very hard work in this position in Brussels, and especially in the Eastern neighborhood. They will need it more than ever. It's at least my impression about the growing problems in the Eastern neighborhood and partner countries. So having said that, it was for me quite an honor that NDI experts from Washington and Kyiv invited me to join their pre-election mission ahead of the local elections in Ukraine. So for us as international observers, for me as a former member of the European Parliament and also the Parliamentary Association Committee with Ukraine, with Verkhovna Rada, it was a very important moment also in my relations, my friendship to Ukraine, because these local elections were the first elections to be organized based on a new electoral code. The preparation of these new laws, electoral laws, the preparation was going on for a very, very, very long time. And finally, we very much appreciated that Ukraine had followed the advices by international experts and institutions, not only from the European Parliament, but supported by the European Parliament, and had changed the fundament of legislation, the fundaments about how to organize elections. And these local elections from our Friends of Ukraine and Observer perspective were kind of a test run also for the new legislation. And so to start with the positive evaluation, so again, it became visible what we saw in many elections since 2004. Ukrainian citizens like to vote, and they can vote. They vote in free elections, and these elections are well organized, meanwhile, by the state and the many people involved in the process on the ground and also in the centralized institutions. And there is, again, this impression that Ukrainians really are convinced that the democratic system is the better system. And they prove it in all the elections, which at least I have observed since 2004, since the last really stolen vote in Ukraine. So there were many challenges so in this test run. And I think it's quite important to not forget and also to bring this message to the Rada that there were too many last-minute changes to the rules, and that those people responsible for the orderly managed process faced many problems. So to only give one example, that so it was until the very end not really 100% clear how to count a ballot valid or not is a very important question for elections. And so instead of last-minute changes, there should have been much more engagement to really work on the better understanding of the law and the procedures. And for the future, one of the most important recommendations, you can even say demands by the observers, the local ones, but also the international ones, is to check what have been the deficits discovered, what have been the problems discovered in this test run, and to work in not hasty, but in a fast, well-organized process based on the recommendations of observers, of Central Election Commission, and to overcome these problems which have their roots in the new election code and also in the last minute changes. So as observer, during the last years, I also share with many other observers the impression that so there is, so after this huge wave of enthusiasm, after presidential vote and after the elections, last elections for parliament in 2019, after this huge wave of enthusiasm and huge expectations into newly elected younger or kind of different politicians, the expectations, so by citizens to politicians went down or became more realistic again. Some observers also already said that so after enthusiasm, we see now pessimism. I would not share this analysis 100%. I think maybe we also witness a new realism among voters, and it's a challenge for the Ukrainian politicians, and I'm talking so about all blocs to think about what does it mean for them? What does it mean for their work? What does it mean for their offers, for their programs? And this is also something what I find important, even if local elections are not the same and follow a bit in all countries different patterns than national politics. So the choice was there. So in these elections, there was a wide range of different so-called parties running. But to be honest, it's until today very, very difficult to really, for a normal Ukrainian, to really get what the difference in the blocs are. Parties do not really exist in Ukraine until today. And it's interesting that the only party which so had established more robust organization as a party, Bakishivna and Yulia Tymoshenko, they had been very successful in the last local elections. That they more or less so were voted out or seemed to disappear in these local elections. So the old party disappears, new parties are fighting to establish themselves as parties, and profiles of the national leaders matter even in the local elections, in the hot phase of the campaign, more than any real program. So I think that in addition to this problem, it was also complicated, at least to what I hear from cities where I have better connections in Ukraine. It was difficult for voters to really find out what the local programs, the offers to the communities in the context of these elections have been. And I even have friends who say it was not because of COVID that they did not vote. Turnout went down. It's one of the negative findings of all observers. But it's not only COVID related. Some also say that it was very difficult to get real informations what was the offer of these many parties and people running in the elections. The media environment, I will not go to the details. It does not really getting better for what we always want. So a level playing field for people running in democratic elections, level playing field, access to media, the control by the media in Ukraine. Most important is still television. The control is in the hands of very few people, and down to the local elections, they are supporting those politicians close to the oligarchs controlling the media. So how to heal this? How to establish better functioning, fair media environment during elections should be discussed. It's not, there's no easy solution, but for sure the better funding, much better funding, and more ambitious work connected to better funding in public broadcasters, also with their extension in new media, is quite important. What was very special in these elections was that for the first time there was a quota for female candidates running. I think this is progress for Ukraine. On the other hand, I think so this quota now fixed in the legislation, in the electoral code, is good step, but obviously not sufficient. Because so I have not all informations about the new numbers of women participating now as elected local councillors in all the councils. I think probably it's getting better. But so if you really want to be sure that you have women as much with as much influence in politics as men, then you have to ask the parties to deal with the quota more honestly, and to really have a 40% or better 50% quota guaranteed in the list, and to fix also a rule in the parties that every second place on a list goes to a woman. So this we have in those countries where you can really see that women are advancing and are getting more and more access to power. These rules now in Ukraine are good, are progress, but are not the way to achieve what people hope to achieve by this. I would, to finish, I have so many notes. I would like to finish with one of the biggest problems which we discovered in the pre-election mission with NDI, like many others. This was the decision that in 18 communities in eastern Ukraine, citizens were not allowed to vote. So while it was a quite so good decision to change the register and to make it easier for internally displaced people or people who are working not in the places where they are at home, to change their address for the voters' registration. So while we really welcomed this huge progress, which we had worked for since long, we found it shocking that without clear criteria and only based on the recommendation of the civil military administration in those 18 communities, the citizens of 18 communities in the Donbas region were not allowed to vote. It was criticized from all the sides of international observers and also by national observers. And I think I can find on my own the reasons why this happened. But since those citizens had been allowed to vote in 2019, it makes no sense to stop them from voting in these local elections. And I think this is one of the topics Ukrainian lawmakers and the Central Election Commission and the observers in Ukraine have to vote on and have to overcome. If citizens in Ukraine are not allowed to vote, this decision must be taken in a very transparent way and based on criteria which are then the same for all citizens and not criteria which are chosen by case. I think these are some of the major things I wanted to mention in the very beginning. I have much more, but maybe it's better if you later on ask also questions.
Ms. Harms, the more you ask, the more I wanted to enter the discussion and ask you some follow-up questions, but I will really withstand doing that and provide an opportunity for our next speakers to feed us in with information, and then we will transition to the discussion. So our next speaker is Pani Irina Shevts, the International Relations Coordinator of the civic network OPORA. So representing local observers and hopefully also being able to comment along the way on some of the observations mentioned by Ms. Harms. So that was both about parties, about quotas for women participation, about IDPs, about media. So how do you reflect as local observers on all those issues? The floor is yours.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you. It's very nice to join the meeting. I will share the presentation right now. And we'll add with a few conclusions. Yeah, so since we've been monitoring the whole electoral campaign, thanks to the network of independent long-term observers and also OPORA people who are deployed at the polling stations on the election day. So this presentation is a mix of some conclusions summing up this whole experience. And I would start with the very first one, and it is an optimistic one, saying that the new electoral system was applied and actually everyone survived.
Извините, пожалуйста, что остановлю вас. У вас презентация раскрыта полностью. Можете еще раз попробовать?
Pani Irina, if you could possibly, yes, enlarge your screen. Thank you so much. Now we see it in its entirety. And can we, thank you, continue?
Yeah, it is okay right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So the first conclusion that I have is that saying that the new electoral system was applied, everyone survived. Everyone meaning the candidates, the voters, and members of the electoral commissions. And yes, there are still many questions to the electoral framework and the way it was adopted, especially those amendments introduced in July that Ms. Harms also mentioned right before the official start of the campaign, dealing with the extending of proportionate voting system to Hromadas with 10K and more, and also introducing the barrier set as 25% of electoral quota for getting promoted on the list, and also the procedural problems that were also mentioned. And there were also many assumptions in terms of the complexity of the new ballot paper, that the voters will not be able to understand how to fill it in and why they can vote also for a concrete candidate, not just for the party. But on the other hand, there were a number of progressive and positive changes. Some of them were mentioned already, meaning the gender quotas, or also the simplified procedure for changing the voting address, mainly aimed at supporting and providing the IDPs and working migrants in helping them to ensure their voting rights as well. The Central Election Commission, on its turn, put a lot of efforts into awareness raising and educational campaigns in order to explain how this electoral system functions and how the ballot will look like. So this is our also appraisal to their work. And also the thing that is due, and our experts were also involved into this process, it is the changes introduced into the criminal code of Ukraine and the code of the administrative offenses. And also we saw a very active involvement of the National Police of Ukraine and other law enforcement agencies, and they really played a crucial role in proactive reaction, because now they have the plenary powers to do this. When we speak about reaction to the electoral offenses like the voters' bribery or illegal campaigning or other offenses that took place. The next conclusion, it is true for all levels of local elections, because actually there are no nationwide campaigning, but it rather consists of small or unique electoral campaigns in every hromada. And here we should say that most of them were highly competitive. And if generally we can evaluate the quality of 2020 local elections, the way they were organized, the way they were conducted, we may say that in most cases it were organized within the current electoral framework, and they were organized on the good organizational level. The next conclusion, here we speak about the candidates and the way they interact or the way they behave themselves while promoting themselves as candidates and their cooperation with the with voters. So here we saw a blended campaigning, I call it in that way, because in order to win, the candidates used a wide range of campaigning tools. And what is new here for these local elections compared to the previous ones, and is probably caused by the COVID-19 and all the restrictions, is that many political parties went online. And a lot of money was actually spent on online campaigning. You can see here the number of $2.5 million that were spent only on Facebook advertising. And we also observed different notions for the first time, like a huge sharing of fake sociological results, shared by politicians of the national level and local leaders in order to manipulate with the public opinion. So yes, it was observed also in past electoral campaigns, but now going online and no responsibility for that also played a crucial role here. Offline methods, in most cases, they stayed the same. So door-to-door campaigning, distribution of campaigning materials, organizing of different events, also, although not that massive, but they all took place. Conclusion number 4. Here we speak about the major violations revealed during this electoral campaign. I should say that they were not massive, but rather serious if we speak of their potential influence on the electoral results. So I should say that vote buying, although it have been also a kind of must be, yeah, sorry to say that, but yeah, on every local elections in Ukraine, but this time we also detected several cases in Kyiv, in Kyivska Oblast, Odessa Oblast, when the voters were openly offered money if they would have supported a concrete party. But now, which is a good thing, is that thanks to the new changes introduced to the criminal code, the law enforcement bodies have more powers to react promptly on such cases. But of course, the key issue here remains, and we should make sure that the ongoing investigations, they will finally end up in court trials. And misuse of the procedure of changing voting address was also another challenge. A simplified procedure should serve only one purpose, as I mentioned before, so providing IDPs or working migrants with voting rights. But at this electoral campaign, it also manifested itself in a kind of electoral manipulation. And we all observed this case in Karolino-Bahas in Odessa Oblast. And again, I should say that an effective investigation of the law enforcement bodies will play a crucial role here. And it is also crucial for preventing any would-be organized abuse of this very procedure. The last issue is, of course, the organizational problems faced by the electoral commissions. So some of them were caused by a new format of electoral system, of course. For instance, when the district commissions made mistakes in the ballot papers, or they forgot to put numbers near the candidates' names, and many other things that could have been avoided if the members of the commissions were taught properly, or there was no so many replacements due to COVID-19. The next one, this is my favorite one. This is something new, actually, for the local elections, because this time the president, he was strongly involved into a campaign led by his political party. He visited regional events, but I think all presidents did that before as well. He campaigned for the candidates. He also behaved himself as a fully pledged subject of the electoral process. And also, you know, behaving like that, he also gave a green light to the officials in the regions who also got involved into electoral races. It is in the same spirit that the initiative of the president to conduct this so-called information opinion poll next to the polling stations on the election day. And the way it was organized is also a huge question, because there was no information on the eve of this poll about the number of polling stations, about the sample, and also who organized it, and how the results will be collected, announced, and whether they will be, how they will be used after that. This slide, it shows some of the violations. It is in Ukrainian, but I will translate. Some of the violations that were revealed during the election day, and the main conclusion here that that these numbers, they are not bigger than the ones we had in 2010 and 2015. So there, some of them are the same, and some of them are even lower. So the most typical violations at 2020 local elections were demonstrating of ballot paper, 7.52%. Also, issuing of a ballot paper without checking a passport. Usually this practice is very usual for the rural areas, when voters do not present their passport or any other ID when taking the ballot paper. So it was true for 10.5%, and also taking pictures of a ballot and ballot stuffing. So 1.6 and less than 1%. Also, yeah, the COVID. We cannot omit this topic. I know that Nazar, his topic is elections under COVID-19. But so I will just briefly share my my conclusions. So the overall conclusion is that there was no coordination and planning of the epidemic prevention measures during the elections. And the government actually failed to demonstrate its full potential for ensuring the security of citizens in this crisis. We can also compare the numbers. For instance, to show that local government didn't receive enough instructions, and therefore they reacted in the way they could do that. For instance, Mykolaiv and Zaporizhia, they spent almost 2 million each for the anti-epidemic measures. And Kyiv, which is much more bigger, which is the capital of the country, spent only 1 million. So you also can feel this difference in the budgets spent in order to secure safe conditions on the polling stations. And also a very disputable one, the turnout. It was, Ms. Harms also touched upon this thing. This is the turnout which was counted by our observers. The official one that was announced by the CEC is a bit higher. It is 36.6%, if I'm not mistaken. But yes, again, if we compare this turnout to the turnout that we had in 2015, and I will just, we had there 46.5% or 48.7% in 2010. So this turnout is really low for Ukraine, even for the local elections. And of course, COVID-19 is one of the main reasons for that. But I would not be that pessimistic, because in any case, this turnout, it is totally okay and sufficient to legitimize the results of local elections. Okay, so thank you. I'm open also for the questions at the end of discussion.
Thank you so very much. I think with these two presentations of international observers and local observers, really got a very comprehensive and in detail and very structured picture of what was going on. But until this very moment, it seemed like everything was going on in a traditional Ukrainian way without too many glitches, if you know what I mean. But apparently the elephant is in the room is COVID-19. So we are now going to listen to Pan Nazar Boyko, who is the head of monitoring analytics group CIFRA, who is going to reflect upon the effects that COVID-19 had on local elections in Ukraine. And just a small caveat, while as before, we know that Pan Nazar wouldn't be in Ukraine, but for COVID-19 himself, because otherwise he would pursue his postdoctoral studies in the US. So I don't know whether it's a good thing that the COVID left you in Ukraine, and what observations have you, what conclusions have you done out of that? Let's listen.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. And just give me a second, I will share my presentation. Are you able to see it?
Yes, see it. You can just probably click one at a time.
Okay. Yeah, very shortly answering your question about being in Ukraine. I think it's a just very exclusive and great time to be in Ukraine when there are elections. And if you are a researcher who are doing elections for more than 10 years, it's very, very good time to be in Ukraine, because then you can design research and figure out how the COVID influence election administration. Since March of this year, a lot of countries. Do you hear me?
There is also streaming online.
I apologize. We hear somebody's microphone. If everyone who is participating and not given, apart from Pan Nazar, could switch out their microphones, I would really appreciate. Pan Nazar, please continue.
Yeah, okay. Since March, all the countries around the world who are running elections, being them democracy, semi-democracy, or autocracies, they face the same and the common challenge that was COVID. And the COVID probably affected all types of elections and all periods of elections from the electoral cycle. I mean, electoral campaigning, turnout, election financing, state capacity, and etc. Considering these elections in Ukraine, we were kind of lucky, because if we get back to March of this year, we would see the negative examples from the primary elections in the US. In some states, there were total chaos, considering with the election administration, and they had a big bunch of the problems. So we had more than half a year to get used to our electoral system, our national legislature, our financial resources to the COVID challenge. And at these elections, we decided to look at how our electoration system was adapted to this extreme challenge. So we decided to design a panel survey.
Just one more question. Could you please press the button so that we could see only one slide? It's better for the audience to read one slide rather than see the entire.
Makes
yeah.
You mean that one?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. Continue.
So, in a nutshell, we decided, based on Lviv Oblast, to run a polling survey, a panel survey of poll workers, those people who are considered in the democracies to be salt of ears, unsung heroes of democracies. So those people who, without whose assistance and support, it would be just impossible to run elections. And we should pride them for their effort and service. So we decided to ask them, what do they think about the COVID challenge, how the electoral administration system was adapted to this challenge, what were the logistical provisions, how they considered the potential problems and challenges on the voting day. So we designed the panel survey. In a nutshell, it means that we surveyed the same people, the same poll workers before the elections, couple of days, and the same people were polled briefly after the elections. So we get the change of the estimates from the same people, and then we can follow how their thoughts and estimates changed before and after the election day. So our total sample was 401 before the elections, and it dropped to 348 for the post-election survey, because some people refused to answer, and it's normal. Methodologically, it's normal. The only stuff here in the details of the survey that I should point out is that we should be very cautious in our generalizations. We should not take these findings and generalize them over all the Ukraine. We should generalize them only for the 13 united territorial communities that we built our sample on. But also we took into consideration the proportion of the size of the precincts in Lviv Oblast. I mean like large, medium and small. So we could cautiously extrapolate this result just to Lviv Oblast. So let's jump just to some interesting findings that I think, and I could elaborate much more on that, but I will try to be as brief as possible. So in the democratic countries, poll workers are considered like very key players in the election administration. And it's a matter of fact that these people participate in election administration due to their civic-minded positions. They want to strengthen democracies, they want to support their communities, and etc. So we decided to see how it correlates, whether it correlates with the Ukrainian poll workers. So we gave the respondents two options. The first one was the work of PEC member, poll worker, is a civic duty and should it be performed on a volunteer basis? And on the other hand, other option, the work of PEC member is a professional activity that should be properly paid. And the result we got surprised us very much. It was 85% of respondents who agreed that work in the commission is a professional activity that should be paid. And for us, it was kind of stuck because on the one hand, you could think that Ukrainian poll workers are motivated with the material incentives exclusively. On the other hand, observing elections in more than 20 countries in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and the US, I have never seen such a great work overload of poll workers in those countries comparing to what we have in Ukraine. If somebody would like to see what is the work overload for Ukrainian poll workers, they would be just highly surprised how much work should be done by these people. So it could be one of the alternative explanations why people want to get some material benefits from their work, because they treat it as a hard and really responsible work. Following, we asked the question, how important is the financial remuneration that you got for your work as a poll worker? And no surprise, more than 60% of poll workers agreed that it was either very important or important. There is a whole much deeper discussion about these remunerations in Ukraine, because it's worth remembering that people in Ukraine are getting both official remunerations from the state. These are small money. That, to be honest, it's like $20 per 24 hours work at the precinct. On the other hand, there is a backside when people getting so-called unofficial remunerations from political parties, from the candidates, and this money are so-called gray money. So they are not, the poll workers are not permitted to get this money, but are still taking this money. And there is a dilemma. If we would eliminate this black money from the electoral process, we would probably, with a high likelihood, would not get enough people in the polling stations. So that's something that should be considered for Ukrainian case. So people getting money, but both from state and from the political actors. 4 out of 3 poll workers got training before the elections. That is really good. And there is much more information about that. We asked follow-up questions about who delivered this training, either Territorial Election Commission or candidates or parties, or maybe Central Election Commission in cooperation with international institutions like IFES. So I will not jump deep here, but if you would have any follow-up questions, I would definitely answer them. This figure is good. I mean, like, considering the COVID restrictions and considering especially the drastic changes to electoral system and electoral law, it was very important that 75% of poll workers at least got some training. So they got some impression what would happen on voting day, how to count the votes, how to manage the voting, the voters' lines, how to manage all all the process on voting day. Then we asked about the big question, personal protective equipment supply. So we asked this question in 2 cases, but I think that the most interesting would be in the post-election survey. So from these results, we can see that poll workers were pretty well provided with face masks and respirators, with antiseptics and with gloves. And honestly, I was observing elections and 20 precincts around the Lviv Oblast, and it was visible. People were wearing the masks, they had gloves. It's something that could be seen. But on the other hand, 13% of the commissions were not provided with the non-contact thermometers. And I think that's the big issue. I mean, in the relative scale, it's not as big. But if you consider that 13 precincts out of 100 were running the election without scanning the temperature from the voters, it could be the potential risk of COVID contracted people entering the polling places and just putting other people under the risk of getting COVID and spreading it. The worst situation was with the glasses and face shields and protective costumes. And I will be very brief here. I witnessed it personally, very interesting situations. The same precinct that was located in the same hall of the school, there was even the wall between these precincts. So people from 2 polling stations could see each other. And the point was that in one polling station, all the poll workers were wearing face shields, while on other polling station, poll workers were sitting just in masks. And it's a puzzle. I mean, it was in the Lviv city, and considering that it was the same school, the provision with the protective equipment was the same. But some poll workers some commissions decided to use them, others decided not to use them. When I asked people who were sitting without these shields, why didn't you use these shields? They complained for the low quality of these shields, and they couldn't see properly through these shields. So it's also the question of the quality of this protective equipment. And of course, protective costumes. And it was a great issue because there was a great discussion before the elections between theorists and practitioners, what to do in case if people contracted the COVID, decided to vote at homes. And there was the constitutional norms that every poll worker has a right for the health, and as well every citizen has the right to access to the ballot box. And I think it was the decision was taken at each separate situation, whether people from the polling station went to COVID contracted poll workers or not. And I can elaborate more on that as well if there will be more questions. So what problems concerned with the COVID happened on the voting days? On the voting day, so we can see that voters, like 25% of voters didn't follow anti-epidemiological measures properly. And I think it's like relatively is a big number, but I think it could be worse. Considering how the process was managed, believe me, it could be worse. So much better was the situation with the observers. So poll workers treated observers as the people who followed anti-epidemiological measures better than the voters. So another fear and another challenge was whether poll workers would start to withdraw from their positions on the voting day, because as Irina mentioned, people could contract the COVID on the voting day, like a couple of days before, and they could just withdraw from the commission, and there is no quorum in the commission. It could be like a big headache. But this fear didn't come true, and it's good. So just few people withdraw from the commission. And what is really good that really tiny number of commissioners refused to fulfill some particular duties and functions on the voting day on the precinct. What I mean, one of the recommendation of the government was to make a cleaning of the precinct facility every 4 hours. So they should wash the floor and wash the handles of the doors and etc. But what was interesting that this norm was not provided with the finances, so nobody was paid for that. And it's really good that poll workers decided to take this burden and follow these recommendations. Finally, final question, considering all the complications and all the challenges on the voting day and pre-voting situation with the COVID, we asked poll workers, considering all they saw and all they experienced, would they participate in the work of the polling administration commission in future? And the answers were really promising. Like more than 70% of poll workers answered that they agree to participate in election administration in the future, or like fully agree or mostly agree. So I think it's a good sign. I think that we have people, we had people on the polling stations in the commissions, and these people will use this experience probably on the following elections if we will still be in the COVID situation in the near future. So overall, I would say that situation was not the perfect, but much better than it was anticipated at the beginning. And of course, it's all the matter of the baseline for the comparison. If you would compare Ukraine to South Korea, of course, we are not like in a so light situation. But if you would consider and compare Ukraine even to the United States for the primary elections in some states, we did pretty good job on that. So I would leave it all here and would be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for this cautiously optimistic picture, as they say in politics, even though we understand the picture is mixed. But again, there is, to my mind, more positive things to think about than negative ones. We're virtually running out of time, but I still consider that the discussion to be very engaging and very relevant. So we will proceed as follows. We will give floor to Pan Ivan Nikolenko, who was running for the Kyiv city administration from the Holos party, because he's our one and only participant who is the insider and knows what it is to be running as a candidate. And then we will definitely tackle big question of corruption, because it came from a few sources, and it extends much beyond elections, because we promised that we would also look a bit ahead of what is awaiting us. So if you can bear with us, please do stay with us for the next, I would say, 10 to 15 minutes. If not, you are very welcome to still submit your questions, and we will try to do our best to put you in touch with the speakers so that they could provide you written answers. And if you were really eager to ask the question, but you would not be able to do so because of the time restrictions. So please, 10-15 more minutes. And so, Pane Ivane, please share your experience in a very short and second manner. Thank you so much. Floor is yours.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, same question here. So if you could just press from beginning of presentation so that we could see one slide at a time. From beginning, this is on the left. Yes. Yeah. Please press it. Thank you.
So, my name is Ivan Nikolenko. I was a candidate from the Golos party, and 790 people have voted for me. Today I'll talk about how changes in the legislation affected the work of candidates during the elections. I will tell you about the stages prior to the elections, about the agitation period, the election day and counting, as well as some violations reported by our team and friendly candidates. So, before the election, the rules were adopted quite late. So, in fact, a week prior to the campaign start, most of the candidates did not understand what the new system will be, how the voting will pass, how many votes they need to win, and how to calculate the quota, and what's the difference even between the district and city lists. Even in the central headquarters of the party, only 2 to 4 people have fully understood the procedure. And so if the candidate himself or herself did not understand how everything works, he or she was completely dependent on the party. I'm talking now not about even the holos, as about, I suppose, most of the parties. Verkhovna Rada deliberately did not reduce quota, and that testifies that many deputies, national deputies, aren't ready to abandon the closed lists. If the candidates in local elections had to gain not the 25% of the quota, but at least 10%, we would see much better work with the voters during the agitation period, and voters would certainly have greater influence on the list. I'm sure there would be quite different voting results. As for my experience, the formation of the electoral list was pretty centralized. Even in Holos Party, it was quite centralized. Yeah, that's the most I can say. Most decisions were made as a result of personal arrangements, and the formation of the list took place with the understanding that only certain candidates are able to gain a quarter of the quota. Some parties obviously didn't care at all about the candidates, so you won't see any candidates number on the boards of Udar, the Klitschko's party, for example. The women's quota is great, but for now it's just a formal legislation rule. But even so, I suppose women can see that the election is not really that difficult and scary, and I hope that there will be the same effect that took place in public budget in Kyiv. That the first time you do not win, but you understand how to perform the next time, and then everything works out. And of course, the last question before elections was that certain districts in Kyiv were sliced in half, and it was a certain indicator of arrangement between major parties. In the Holos Party, some candidates deliberately moved to other districts because they realized that in their district, the competition will be too tough, and everyone had little chance. But then the districts were cut in half, and the chances of passing for candidates from small parties became even smaller. The agitation period was way too short, and 2 months, as far as I know, that is checked in legislation, it's obviously not enough. In such conditions, it's almost impossible to establish any stable ties with voters. So you can only win if one candidate can only win if he or she either has the first place in the districts in the district or city list, or if he or she already has a community of warm contacts who are ready to vote for them personally. There was the community of Kyiv Polytechnic Institute, where half of the votes were given to me, but from scratch, when you do not have warm contacts with voters, you can collect only up to 1,000 votes, I would say so. And even with one independent candidate simply doesn't have such resources. So of course the problem with the quota was acute, and in fact most candidates understood that everyone has the opportunity, but it depends on how many people are already knew you. There was a logistical problem with the election fund because prior to registration, it's not possible for a candidate to open a candidate's fund and to participate in campaign. And most parties were trying to letter the registration of the candidates. They dragged so because they formed list with the understanding that few people would get a quota. Accordingly, when at the end of September, all parties began to register candidates, simply just printing houses were overloaded, and at the same time, the less the party wanted someone to let someone gain a quota, the more the party could centralize the decision-making process. Where to print, what is possible and what is not during the campaign, how to raise money, whether or not it is possible to open a candidate's fund, and so on. In general, I would say that people are friendly, but most of them did not just come to the elections. We did not keep the statistics, but had absolutely normal communications with most people. The purpose of our campaign was not just to distribute printed materials like for most others, but to meet people and to take their contacts. So we could form a close, tight community. Therefore, we talked to most people with whom we had a conversation for more than even 10 minutes. And we tried to ask them about problems, which party did they support, and we tried to take contacts with like phone number or social media account. We tried to not hardly impose a party for a candidate or a candidate for to people, so people were quite friendly. However, even with those with whom we spoke and had like this 10-minute contact, we had difficulties with establishing the second contact. We called and wrote to them several days prior the election day to remind them about the election, and less than 30% answered. But in general, it wasn't difficult to explain the new system to voters. At least for Kyiv voters, I would say so. The majority of votes in Kyiv Polytechnic Institute polling stations and in the Solomyansky district in general were given to the specific candidates. Only 13% of votes of voters supported the party's general list. Of course, many people picked up the first number because they simply didn't know the others, but at least the understanding that it is necessary to support someone particular was present. And as an intermediary stage, I would say it's normal. At the same time, most older people had obvious difficulties in understanding the ballot paper and for whom to vote. There were a lot of controlled voting nets for Palchevsky, Yednist, and Udar in our district specifically, and pensioners there had problems with ballots because they just didn't understand where to put a tick. Many of their ballots were either in support of the entire list or simply invalid. As for the election day, I would say a little about, mostly about violations that took place. It was good that thousands of people took advantage of the opportunity to change the place of voting directly where they live. And it was good that the procedure simply doesn't require any confirmation at all. But at the same time, there were obvious outliers in these thousands of people, where several dozen people changed their addresses at one district. And in total, there were up to 300-400 people in only Solomyansky district who decided to change their voting place specifically to one polling station. And this was continued by the fact that people are brought to vote by whole buses from nearby villages, and hopefully the police caught at least some of them. I would say, as for the most common violation that was obvious in Solomyansky district and mostly even in Kyiv, I would say that it was controlled voting and controlled nets of voters who get money for their votes. There were these nets were especially aimed at retirees and socially vulnerable people. I saw personally in one of the Kyiv universities how students were ready to sell their vote for 200 hryvnias. It's kind of around $7 only. And only in Solomyansky area, several organizers of such paid grids were caught. And I think it's good that for such violations, criminal liability is now established. There were quite a few ballots thrown in packs. At least there was not much loud news about these cases. And but although the parties cannot pay district commission members, this practice is very common. Therefore, there were several controlled polling stations in the Solomyansky district whose chairmen or secretaries were noticed in the previous elections for organizing such controlled paid voting nets. And so this year they engaged in parallel counting on the polling station, which is prohibited by law, and observers who demanded legality were simply removed from the polling station. And it was a common practice in Solominsky district. In general, I think the less people participate in election, and we have seen that around 30% of people in Kyiv participated. The less people participate in election and come to the polling station, the more opportunities for manipulation there is, and the greater is the impact of paid voter nets and controlled counting. And so, at the end of the day, the calculation was long and complex, and really many commission members did not even know how to properly count the ballots. Therefore, observers often explained the requirements of the law and demanded legality. And so if there were no people at the polling station who knew the counting procedure and could not fill in the quality protocols, it ended up with the recalculation at the territorial commissions. In general, in Solominsky district, the counting was completed only for the fourth day.
Disappeared from our screens.
Sorry?
Yeah, you have disappeared shortly from our screens. So you stopped the slide about after the election evaluation.
Yeah, I would say that the imperative mandate, it plays a double role. On the one hand, each candidate can compete despite the number in the list and has a chance to win. And on the other hand, this can be seen as the fact that the candidates are just non-paid elite agitators who worked for the party. With the help of their own voters who had already been formed into a warm community, close community, the candidates helped the party to pass. That is, the candidates themselves invested more in the party than get from the party. And it is easy to imagine a further situation using an imperative mandate. The candidate wins thanks to the votes of his local community, a warm audience, and then defends its interest, which can easily be outrun, which can be easily recognized as counter to the party's position, for which he or she may be position he or she may be removed from the list. But this is, I would say, for now, is just a scary story, but I can think of a situation like this. As for a conclusion, I would say that the new legislation is pretty fine, and we just need a larger turnout of voters. As a result of the majority of participants of election process understands both how the list works, how the candidates list works, and how to vote for the specific individuals. Now it's just necessary to involve more people in elections and to provide proof for them that their decision is valuable. Certainly a longer period for agitation is needed, and the process of participation plays a double role, and especially in the local communities with less than 10,000 voters. And I would say that competition between the candidates was pretty fine. Now we just need a real possibility to form a dynamic rating with by gaining only 5 or 10% of the quota, and parties will completely lose influence on the lists. That would be all I would say. Thank you for your attention. I'm open to answer any questions if you have one.
Thank you so very much to all the speakers who provided such detailed, structured, comprehensive presentations. And I apologize to our participants again who are not being able to interact. So I just take this liberty to announce kind of the final round, like the final comments from the speakers, combined with the questions that we received. And one of the main questions, as I announced before, is regarding the corruption. So one of them, namely about the local elections. So do political parties financing present source of corruption? Yes or no? And please support your answer with the arguments. And more general question, and I think it has to do more with the constitutional crisis that Ukraine is now undergoing through, but it sounds the following way. How to curb Ukrainian corruption with legal lenience on parliament members' disclosure rules enforcement? So as said, it has more to do with the electronic declarations and the parliament's lenience towards this this situation. Let's go in the same way as we did the presentations, starting with Ms. Harms, either providing the answer to or commenting on corruption issue, or just providing more general comments by way of conclusion, please. Just a short comment. We hear somebody's background noise. So if everybody who is not speaking could switch off the microphone, I would be very thankful.
So on this big issue of party financing, campaign financing, transparency and corruption, I think there is still a lot of space for improvement in the transparency in general for party finances. And it is a problem that citizens of Ukraine until today cannot really get sufficient insight in the financial structures behind a party. And so this plus more oversight of campaign financing is an issue to be tackled. I think I have not the time to go into the details, but the report, which has been published by NDI after the local elections, has a list of recommendations, a detailed list of recommendations, how to strengthen transparency and how to overcome the different problems of maybe also money laundering behind party finances. I think you should check, and those people with access to Verkhovna Rada colleagues or also to election committees in the regions and on the national level, they should make this an issue. I would like to mention as one detail that I was astonished about the finding, and I really didn't know it, that a clear percentage of the news on Ukrainian television channels is bought, so is financed, is not created independently, but is produced because people are paying for it. I think this is a real problem, and we need more insight in this. I think also that there are NGOs working close to parties during election campaigns, but are not following or have not to follow the same rules, transparency rules as parties have. It's a problem and should have consequences. And a major point also listed in the list by the NDI observers is that for non-compliance, you need sanctions and real sanctions, not symbolic sanctions, So the sums you have to pay in case of non-compliance should be adequate to the breach of law and the money involved in this non-compliance with the law. This is something what I wanted to say to the question. Hey, Dmitro, I saw that the question was by you. We have not met since long, but good to know that you are still working. My last comments would be on the general question posed to us. I think that so the whole debate, the new debate about corruption and the reforms which we have managed to bring through, so is a very tricky one. And I think, so I myself, when I saw the news from Ukraine on the Constitutional Court, so first of all, my reaction was, it's not a surprise. So we could see this coming. My second thought was, so what was the mistake maybe also I am responsible for? And I must say that I think the enthusiasm which I supported in fighting for the anti-corruption pillar, the new institutions in the judiciary, in the legal system of Ukraine to fight corruption. I'm happy that we created those institutions, and you know, or many of you know, that in Brussels we always organized strong support for NABU and those who really stand for good goals in this fight against corruption. On the other hand, since long I observe the deficits in the reform of the judiciary as a whole. And quite obviously, it's not enough to create an anti-corruption pillar in the legal system. So there must be the same dedication to fight corruption in the rest of the system. And right now, my recommendations for Kyiv have been that whatsoever the Venice Commission told, there are very important recommendations by the Venice Commission, and they should matter. But also, you need, as politicians in Kyiv now, to find a robust way out of this crisis. This means for me that you cannot only heal the symptom. So you have to really go for the reform of the judiciary, and you should start this process with the biggest possible majority in the Rada. It should not be the task of one bloc or one faction or those in power. To have a lasting result to improve the situation in Ukraine. So a real coalition of the pro-democratic, pro-rule of law, pro-European members of the Rada is needed. And I don't know whether this is too demanding, but I think this is a kind of test for many well-minded and also some of the very experienced members in the Rada, as well as for those governing in Kyiv and for the president as well. But, so this fight against corruption cannot be the task for one party in Ukraine. it has to be the task for the majority of politicians.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. And now, brief comment, probably 2 sentences for Pani Irina.
Okay, thank you. I'm not an expert in the constitutional reforms, so I will mostly focus on the party financing. And this, so this is a huge challenge, and I would totally agree with Ms. Harms that there is a lot of room for legislative amendments here. For instance, if we may speak examples, the electoral code, it actually allows for those political parties who are not going to campaign. It allows for not opening the funds, the electoral funds, actually. So I really hope that till the end of this year, the parliamentary committee, they will come up with some suggestions on how to regulate the situation. And also another challenge was also for the district electoral commissions, because these are the commissions that are authorized to gather and to publish the interim and financial reports. And we also had a short research on this in 15 big cities all over Ukraine, and our conclusions are that only up to 50% of those reports were actually published. So half of the reports were only published, so I really hope that the MPs will have a closer look on this problem, because it needs to be urgently regulated. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pana Nazara, how do you feel about political parties financing?
I don't understand the margins of my expertise, and I'm not the expert in the political finances, neither political finances nor a constitutional court. But I would like to use a couple of minutes to briefly reflect to what Ivan Nikolenko told in his speech. It was extremely interesting, and it's really great that you have the candidate on board, because it's really hard to get somebody from the other side to be so open in the reflections and discussion. And I would just to follow up that we have almost the same patterns in the results of open lists in Lviv Oblast, as you mentioned in a Kyiv city. Despite the low election turnout, those who showed up on the voting day vote for the candidates at the rate of 80%. So people like this option. On the other hand, another indication that people get the new electoral system and the way of voting was the low number of invalid ballots. We had them 7%. I was expecting it would be more than 10% at least. So it's a really good sign that even for this one short month of electoral campaign, we were able to squeeze so much. So thank you for the information, and I will stop here.
So, Pane Ivane, any reflections on what you have just heard, or on the corruption in the local election process?
Well, basically, I would say that Irina have told everything that I wanted to tell about regarding National Agency on Corruption Prevention. Yeah, I hope that political parties will get this opportunity, I would say, to report their finances back.
Probably not as much an opportunity, but an obligation, which would make it mandatory and not just optional.
I think this is great for the political party itself, because they can show that they are open and they do not launder money.
Thank you so very much again to everybody who stayed up until now. We have not lost almost anybody, with a few people's exception. So I feel that these discussions need to go on, and we would already like to announce that constitutional crisis is in a pipeline of our topics for discussions for the future. So please stay tuned and join the discussions, as only in this dialogue and in this debate process we can keep the levels of civic participation high and move Ukraine closer to the EU. And thank you again, everybody, and particularly, I see Pani Rebecca is showing us if we, yes, that there is a case promote Ukraine. Thank you so much for doing it for us for such a long time and staying fervent to this idea. Thank you, everybody. The meeting is discharged.
Have a great day all.
Bye-bye.